Greetings from Bulgaria. I'm Volk, and this video is the second improvised test. Well, I will not show much as I will talk much about Operations and Warzone performance. Star Wars The Old Republic patch 3.3.2 brought some hardware improvements or so by our code. The video you're watching has been recorded for different purposes about 3 or 4 days ago. We were doing a random just casual stroll through TFB Nightmare. This is the final boss, by the way. I will not be able to show you a Warzone because I wanted to have an absolutely clear performance. Even though I'm recording with shadow play, it doesn't really impact the FPS, or if it does, it maybe shaves off like 1 or 2 frames and lowers it down with that much. But I really wanted clear performance. That's why I decided to not record everything I was testing, and just so we have some kind of a video picture moving on, I've decided to upload this video. It's still recorded after the patch went live, but it's not exactly the most relevant one. I want to maybe include a quick swift apology here. My voice may sound different and I'm really struggling to speak. That's why the video was delayed with 3 or 4 days. I'm a little bit ill and having issues speaking, but I really wanted to finish the video and publish it while it's still relevant and before we get the next patch, because you never know what BioWare is going to break or make with the next patch in the game. They have that habit. I think I've wasted enough of your time. Let's start talking about the performance. Unfortunately, not much has changed. Yes, the loading times in Operations are much quicker and much better, including Scum and Villainy. I think I've mentioned that in the previous video. The loading times definitely are better everywhere. I've tested it to the fleet, from the fleet, strongholds, planets, operations. Every single load time is improved. I can't say by how much because I didn't calculate, but that was a topic for the previous video. For the operations, TFB seems to be getting slower and slower with each month and with each year. For this video's performance, the FPS was, when heavy combat happened, in the range of 30s and 40s. Exactly not exactly, but around 2 years ago, when this was actually endgame content, and with a weaker video card in my PC, everything else was the same, I actually had better performance. I've always been playing the game on absolute maximum. This is the case with this video. This has been the case with all of my videos since I've started uploading to my YouTube channel. So basically for about 2.5 years now, I've been playing the game on max settings and recording on max settings. Unfortunately, the frame rates are still very unreliable. They go all up and down all the time without real reason. The activity on the screen is the same, but for no apparent reason you will see the frame rate dropping from 50 down to 30, 35. Yes, it's still above 30. It's still considered very good by most of us, or most of you, I should say, because that's SWTOR and we know it has serious issues with performance. But 30 FPS for a game based on DirectX 9 and released almost 4 years ago, that's horrible. If you're a new player, know that it's not your PC, it's not your system. Whatever you buy, your hardware will still struggle with the game in specific areas, in specific zones. The next operation we did, well, I can't do them in chronological order, but the next one I want to talk about will be Colossal Monolith. This is the instanced world boss, or the instanced operation boss, whatever you want to call it, on Ziost. We did it story mode and hard mode, first because we wanted some gear, and second because we wanted to do some testing. One thing I have noticed, while in story mode you rarely wipe, although it does happen because we usually do it 16-man story mode with 8 people, or depending on the disconnect, sometimes we may finish with 7. But the issue with wiping still remains just like before. If you happen to wipe and you spawn inside this instance, your FPS seems to be going lower. I don't know if that's global, but so far pretty much everybody I've shared this observation with confirms it, more or less. What I mean is, if you enter the boss for the first time, you have a, let's say, just for an example, FPS in the range of 50s. You start the combat, FPS obviously drops for me. Usually it drops from the range of 50s and 60s down to the 25s, 35s. If you wipe, that is more to say for the hard mode, because that's really my hands-on experience. I don't wipe too much on story mode and I can't say, but I'm almost sure it's the same. When you wipe on hard mode, it gets progressively slow. Every time you wipe and spawn inside the instance without getting out in front of the door, in front of the purple screen on the outer side, if you don't do that, your FPS seems to be going lower and lower. I've tried to determine and find out what's the reason for that. First, I thought maybe it's some kind of a memory leak, but I couldn't find and prove it. So if it is, maybe it's very small, maybe it doesn't happen all the time, or maybe there is some other reason. However, I have noticed that every time when the group wipes, if you exit outside of the area and you enter manually, the FPS seems to improve itself somehow. And also, I've tested that numerous times. If you relog, the FPS goes back to normal. Yes, when you start combat, it goes incredibly low. And if you have an incredibly and uber powerful hardware spec, maybe you'll be able to play it on max settings on a very high resolution with anything above 30 FPS, but my personal experience is on 1440p with everything maxed out. If you want to see my hardware specs, you can visit my Twitch account. They are absolutely not the best, but they are seriously very good ones. When I'm recording or when I'm not, the performance still suffers a lot. And what I mean to say is there is absolutely no change compared to before the patch. So whatever improvements BioWare attempted to do, they haven't impacted the Colossal Monolith, maybe because it's not considered a crowded area. I am thinking most of these FPS issues come from the multiple rifts in the area that are all animated. The animations are very cool and very attractive, but I have a feeling they really bring everything down. Yes, I've tried lowering the settings, it doesn't help. The FPS loss is still there. The only difference is, before we enter combat, my initial FPS is an absolute steady 100 when I lower my graphical settings from within the game menu. If I don't do that, if I keep everything on max, usually when I enter for the first time, my FPS is in the range of 60s, or, well, it varies actually. I don't know why, but it does vary. It's not exactly the same always and all the time. Next on the topic is Ravagers and Temple of Sacrifice. I would combine both of them because my performance personally is pretty much the same in both of them. We did some bosses, we didn't finish them because, you know, but the few bosses that I had a chance to do this week, the performance is again absolutely the same, maybe even worse, but if it's worse, it's more like a personal subjective opinion, so I can't really say it's gotten worse, but it definitely hasn't gotten any better. The Ravagers performs exactly the same. I think I have noticed a very minor improvement in the second boss of Temple of Sacrifice. You know, when things started dropping on the floor, there is a significant amount of animations and effects happening on your screen. Of course, depending on your resolution, you might see more of them or less of them. The more you see, the more graphical power is required. And remember something, everybody says that in an MMO, and specifically in this one, CPU is what matters. No, the higher resolution you play on, the more graphical power is required. This means you need a better video card. You can't play on uber high resolution. I don't know what's considered uber high these days, probably 4K. Since I play on 1440p, I considered mine very high resolution since it's higher than the global standard, because these days 1080p is an absolute standard. If you have higher than that, you're better. Well, you're luckier. Better is a stupid word. If you have lower than that, you actually don't see the game the way it's meant to be seen, I guess. Enough babbling about this. The next topic would be about Scum and Villainy. I've mentioned that in the very beginning, but I want to touch it one more time. The loading time. Wow. Loading time, I've mentioned, have been improved significantly everywhere, but Scum and villainy for me personally has been an issue since day one. I've never been able to determine whether it's overcrowded area because everybody was doing that in the beginning, but later on, in some 2 years after, it's not endgame content anymore. I don't know why, but sometimes the loading times entering the operations are really crazy. My FPS still drops on the third boss. This is the most FPS intensive and FPS most buggy fight, if I can call it like this. Um, Usually, especially during around the 50% stage when we get the two groups on the front and on the back, and this very moment my FPS drops significantly. The lowest I saw in my previous last run was in the range of 35, so it was still very playable, it was still very good to be seen and experienced, but it's a significant drop compared to what I usually play with on other bosses and even on this boss, but on other stages. I don't know what's happening, but this boss is really weird and buggy. And then for a clear example, on the Styrak fight, I had a perfect 55 plus FPS. I don't know why. I actually believe this is an improvement, but since I've done it only once, I think it might actually be just something lucky, or I don't know, my system being clean or something else. On the PvP side, I did exactly 3 war zones to try and test and prove there is absolute no change. In the Void Star, whenever everybody is in front of the same door, the FPS still drops. It's very hard to determine because every time the number of people, the number of the variations of classes and effects used, depending also on the level. I did 3 war zones, once as a level 55 Marauder and twice as my level 60 Sentinel. So depending on what you're doing, sometimes the FPS may be higher, maybe lower. Of course, if you're doing mid-base or low bracket PvP, the number of effects and abilities available to players scales down. This progressively improves the performance, and I guess that's just logical. Everybody has experienced it. It's not just that you're free to roam as a melee DPS, being free most of the time, because not everybody has their 2,015,000 CC abilities to keep you locked down. The second one I tested was the second hood bow, the Quash bow. I still don't know how to call it. They call it the Quash hood bow, but I like it Quash bow. I don't know why, it's just a cool name. The performance there is still terrible because it's a very wide open area and it's very vertical. There is a lot of flames, a lot of effects and everything else. The FPS there is exactly the same as I've experienced it before. Again, in this week, I didn't have time to play the same Warzone multiple times to be able to compare frames and numbers more correctly and more mathematically exact, but the issues are still there. I personally did not notice an improvement. So to sum up, because I think it's going for far too long, the experience with FPS in operations and PvP has not changed for me. If it has positively, it's more probably because of some kind of a luck factor or maybe something temporary, but as a matter of fact, in some cases, I think it's actually going worse. Why it's going worse? It's very logical because BioWare keeps adding new effects and new animations into the game, and it's still the same old crappy engine that is not able to support those new effects. Something similar I've experienced years ago with multiple patches while I was playing Star Wars Galaxies. The developers there from Sony kept adding new animations and new effects to the very old crappy engine that obviously it wasn't built for them and it couldn't support them. So the result was slideshow. Thank you guys for watching and listening this video. I hope you will find it useful. Please share your personal experience. I know that many of you already shared Ops and PvP experience in my first test, but if you feel like you have nothing better to do, write me another comment about it under this video. Bye bye. Remember, you can find me also on Twitch, Twitter and Facebook.